Bună ziua! Bună seara, good evening! Cred că suntem deja live și Temple Grandin este alături de noi. Aveam deja o conversație interesantă despre perioada aceasta de COVID, pe care chiar aș folosi-o ca o metodă de a da startul acestei discuții interesante din seara aceasta, încadrată în seria de evenimente a HATOC, o serie de evenimente care prezintă cărțile pe care le scoatem în colecția AHA Books, respectiv intermediază aceste întâlniri cu autorii lor. A 5-a carte din colecția AHA Books tocmai a apărut în colecția noastră de la Asociația Help Autism. Este poate cea mai importantă, cea mai cunoscută carte a autoarei, Temple Grandin. Se numește Gândesc în imagini și alte relatări din viața mea cu autism. O identificați așa, fie pe site-ul shop-ul nostru online, fie în librării. Și este, cum vă spuneam, al 5-lea titlu de când am început să deschidem să prilejuim aceste momente de reflexie asupra minților diverse. Temple Grandin a acceptat să fie astăzi alături de noi într-o conversație mult mai dinamică decât am anticipat, așa că o invit alături de noi. Conversația va fi în limba engleză. Vă rog încă de la început să lăsați întrebările voastre în chat, fie pe Facebook, fie pe YouTube, în cele două spații în care suntem acum live, iar cu ajutorul colegilor mei le vom traduce și le vom adresa autoarei. Conversația va fi de asemenea înregistrată, așa că vom avea prilejul să o reascultăm și apoi, poate chiar cu subtitrare în limba română. Thank you very much for your patience. Welcome, Temple Grandin, and thank you very, very much for accepting to talk to Romanian public at the launch of your second book, the Romanian version of Thinking in Pictures. Good morning to you, I think.
It's really wonderful to be here. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning in the U.S. right now. And I'm really happy that my book, Thinking in Pictures, is available in Romanian, because I want to help people with autism to lead really successful lives. And we're using a technology right now, StreamYard, a conferencing technology. And there probably were some autistic people involved in making this. You would not have technology without people with autism. Mm-hmm. Your brain can be more social emotional, or a brain can sort of go more towards thinking and cognition. Now, the person with autism, it goes towards the thinking and cognition. You see, up in the brain, you only have so much space for processing. So what am I going to use this computer for? Am I going to use it to socialize, which takes up a lot of processor space in the brain? Or am I going to use it to invent something? Okay, mm-hmm. There are people that invented StreamYard that are probably more interested in how things work. And so
we were talking before this event, and even in your book, you are referring to a lot of autistic brains who are conscious or not, acknowledging that they are autistic brains, working in IT environments. And you were actually stating before this event that everything surrounding us, especially technology, has a little part of autistic brain in its making.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And in Thinking in Pictures, you begin the book by saying this and just going to read only the beginning and then give you the floor for your introduction. I think in pictures, words are like a second language to me. I translate both spoken and written words into full color movies, complete with sounds, which run like a VCR tape in my head. When somebody speaks to me, his words are instantly translated into pictures. Language-based thinkers often find this phenomenon difficult to understand, but in my job as an equipment designer for the livestock industry, visual thinking is a tremendous advantage. Let's start with this conversation. How did you get to write this book?
Well, Oliver Sacks had written a piece about me in one of our magazines in the U.S., and a book agent saw it named Pat Brynan, and she came and seeked me out and asked if I'd be interested in writing a book. And so we put together a proposal, and she sent it to a major book publisher. It was Doubleday at the time, and they said they would publish it, and that's how it came about. And when I first started, I thought everybody thought in pictures. Now, when I wrote Thinking in Pictures, that would have been in 1995. By then, I knew that there were other people that were verbal. But when I was young in my 20s, I thought everybody thought in pictures. And it was a real surprise to me to learn that other people think much more verbally and think in words. And have now learned that we have people that think in pictures, but we've also got people that think more in mathematics and patterns. And then you've got people that think in strictly in words. Now, when I was a little kid, I had no speech until age 4. I got into very good early speech therapy. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of getting into really good early speech therapy. And when you talk to the little children, slow down when you talk to them. Slow down. My speech teacher would hold up a cup and she'd go cup, and then she'd go cup. Say it slow, say it fast. You also need to give the child time to respond. Their brain processes more slowly. Give them time to respond. Really important. Also, as a very young child, there was a lot of emphasis on turn taking, learning how to wait and take turns. So you might ask, how can you figure out what kind of a thinker your child is? Now, it's usually not going to show up in 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds. But when the kids get older, maybe around 7 or 8 years old, then you can start to see how they think. But you need to expose them to a lot of things. A child has to be exposed to music and musical instruments, for example, in order to get interested in that. I was exposed to musical instruments. I couldn't figure out how to play them. But another child's going to go to the piano or to a keyboard and just very quickly, figure out how to play it. What you need to be doing with kids with autism is build on the strengths. These kids often have uneven skills, good at one thing, bad at something else. Build on the thing they're good at. And when they get to be around 7 or 8 years old, it was obvious that I was a visual thinker because I was very good at art. And I would draw the same horse head over and over again. And my mother would suggest that I maybe draw the entire horse, maybe draw the saddle or the stable, and expand it. Take that thing the child's interested in and expand it. And we could learn reading, and we read about horses. In other words, use that interest to teach reading. Or if you ride a horse and he goes a certain speed, how long would it take to go someplace? That would be mathematics. And then you have another kid who's the more mathematical mind. And this is the kind of kid that when he grows up might be really good at computer programming or chemistry or physics. They think in patterns. I think in photorealistic pictures, and I describe that in Thinking in Pictures. But not everybody on the spectrum thinks in pictures. You have another child who's going to be the mathematics kind of kid. Well, that's a child you might want to expose them to some programming languages, maybe some JavaScript or some Python. And then you have the autistic person who thinks in words. They are not a picture thinker or a math thinker. Now, the visual thinkers like me and the kids that are good at mathematics, we both like to build things. But the ones that are more like me are really into drawing a lot of very realistic drawings. The word thinkers often love facts. They love history. They love facts about sports statistics, movie stars, whatever their favorite thing is. And it's all word thinking. And they usually aren't interested in drawing or interested in building things. I think it's important for kids to grow up, learn how to use tools. We have a little nursery school right next to where I live. I was over there yesterday. And little 3-year-olds were riding trikes and playing with toy trucks and learning how to get along with other children. Really important now with COVID that kids have an opportunity to play with some other kids. Another big problem I'm seeing is, since autism is such a big spectrum, you've got one person who go work for a computer company or a tech company, but you have another person on the spectrum who's very, very severe. They're not going to be working for a computer company, and they may have a lot of other medical things wrong with them. And so you've got a spectrum that verbally is very broad, but someone like me is very different from somebody that might have medical problems, epilepsy, and cannot talk, and may even have problems with some basic movement. And you call it the same name, it doesn't make very much sense. Now, I'm very concerned about getting people on the spectrum into good jobs. I've worked with designing livestock facilities for large beef companies. And one of the things I learned is that when you're really weird, and these pictures are in my book, Thinking in Pictures, but here are some of my drawings. And the way I would get jobs when I did an interview is I would show off my drawings. And there's drawings and pictures of my projects in the Thinking in Pictures book. And so I would, show the work off. Now, I worked on a lot of large factories, and I worked with some really brilliant, skilled tradespeople, inventing equipment, people that had many, many patents for different kinds of equipment. And I would estimate that 20% of these people I worked with were a person with autism or dyslexia or maybe attention deficit. And they were brilliant. And often these visual thinkers don't get enough credit. I've been looking at the Mars rover. There's handmade wiring in her cameras. I have looked them up online. And it is mission critical. The little helicopters now, it's been flying around and been doing a bigger flight now. Well, somebody made her in a shop. That's not given enough credit. That's mission critical. Your mathematicians got it there. But people had to make the stuff. It's a one-of-a-kind machine. The wheels were probably milled on a computerized milling machine, but somebody had to run that. Probably 2 people made those wheels on a computerized milling machine from single blocks of aircraft-grade aluminum. And that often doesn't get enough credit. Well, let's look at some of the things that could be good careers for the different kinds of minds. My kind of mind, visual thinker, very good at art, be a good artist. Animation, be good at animation. Costumes for theater, photography. I saw some photography recently that a 12-year-old had done, professional photography of buildings, 12 years old. I was given a good camera, and he very quickly learned how to use it. The skilled trades, like making the parts that are on the Mars rover. There's many different things that my kind of mind's good at. Industrial design. There's 2 parts of engineering. There's the more visual thinking part, and then there's the more mathematical part. And I have found that when I've looked at food processing plants, the more mathematical engineers will do things like boilers, refrigeration, the framework of the building. And then my kind of mind makes all the clever equipment that goes inside. So your second kind of mind is your mathematical mind. They think in patterns. I think in photorealistic pictures. The mathematical mind thinks in patterns. And there's some wonderful websites that you can look at, like Wolfram Mathematica, wolf like a wolf, ram like a shape, Wolfram Mathematica. You might want to look up protein symmetry on Google for images. You will see beautiful patterns and chemistry in beautiful patterns that's inside your body. That's for the mathematician mind. And a lot of these individuals become engineers, computer programmers, go into physics, chemistry. Right now there's some big new experiment in physics that's going on right now. And yes, you definitely had people with autism involved in that. And then you have your word thinkers. And some of those have been very good at specialized sales. I gave a talk recently at a bank, a large bank, and they have people that are the word thinkers selling financial products, or in another place maybe selling cars, because they know the details of every car on the lot. Now, one of the big problems I'm seeing is there's too much sort of a disability mentality, especially with the fully verbal individuals, where they go, well, he's a person with autism, we'll shop for him. And I'm going, no, he needs to learn how to shop for himself. I learned shopping when I was like 7 or 8 years old. I was given a little allowance of money. I knew exactly what I could buy with it. I could get 5 comics with my 50 cents when in the 50s. But if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I was learning that when I was 7. Really important things to learn. And I'm seeing teenagers today haven't gone shopping. They're not learning life skills. No, there's no excuse for that. You've got to learn life skills. The other mistake I see is often too much emphasis on academics and not enough emphasis on basic life skills, bank account, shopping. Okay, personal hygiene, that is something that's non-negotiable. You got to clean it up. I'm eccentric, but you got to be clean. But just your basic skills. The other thing is we need to learn work skills early. That starts with chores around the house when they're really young. You can do volunteer jobs when they're 11 years old. If there's papers to be delivered, they should be doing that. Maybe find a little shop where they can help out in a shop. But they need to get in an environment where somebody outside the family is the boss. Working skills. And before they graduate from high school, they need to learn how to get some real jobs. Now, there's some kinds of jobs that are very difficult for people with autism, and that's a lot of multitasking. Super busy takeout restaurant, takeout window, that would probably be a bad job. Find something with a little less multitasking. And if I was a computer, I'd be an Intel 286 with a very small processor, but I'm going to have a warehouse full of servers for my memory. So lots of memory, but a very, very small processor. So multitasking is a problem. This also explains why the little kids are sometimes slow to respond. Attention shifting, that can be slow. But there's other things I can do really well because designing equipment does not require working memory. Another thing I have a problem with is I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. If I need instructions on how to do a job, let me write it down. Let me make a checklist where I write it down. But kids need to be learning working skills. I cannot emphasize that enough. And driving, it's going to take longer. I drove 400 kilometers on dirt roads before I did any traffic. You've got to get the driving, steering, the brake, the shifting gears into what's called motor memory, where you don't have to think about it. And then you slowly, carefully go into traffic. Take a whole lot longer. Practice 20 minutes a day, big parking lots, back roads, open fields, big places where it's completely safe. And practice for a whole lot longer. Because if I had not learned to drive, that would have really restricted my career options. Well, I think now we can probably do some questions. But we need to be looking more at what a person can do. And often a person with autism can be extremely good at something specialized, like photography or machinery design or doing a skilled trade. And I'm talking about some of the really high-end skilled trades. We have a program in the U.S. called TACT. And they're teaching trades such as fixing cars and electrician. Okay, we got some questions. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Now? Can you hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you now. Okay.
I've listened carefully, and it's fascinating how in your book you actually describe the way you are seeing the world. And I will take this opportunity just to read this paragraph from your book that makes the comparison between your way of seeing the world and VR, since it's so actual for this world. You say like this: today, everyone is excited about the new virtual reality computer systems in which the user wears special goggles and is fully immersed in video game action. To me, these systems are like crude cartoons. My imagination works like the computer graphics programs that created the lifelike dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. When I do an equipment simulation in my imagination work on an engineering problem, it is like seeing it on a videotape in my mind. I can view it from any angle, placing myself above or below the equipment and rotating it at the same time. I don't need a fancy graphics program that can produce three-dimensional design simulation. I can do it better and faster in my head. At one point, you also describe how people that with autism that are also verbal can describe this way of thinking. How can we, or how can parents or specialists understand which type of autistic brain they have in front of them if the kid is not verbal?
Well, what can he do? Now, there's some nonverbal kids that can type independently, completely independently. And there's some really good books written by people that are nonverbal. This is a new one that's going to be coming out this summer. I have been buried under years of dust. I was sent a review copy of it. There's also Tita Mukapadahay, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? And he describes problems with the sensory systems not working right, visual images being scrambled. I definitely don't have that problem. Problems with controlling his movements. And if you're working with individuals that remain nonverbal, this new book I just showed you, then there's The Reason I Jump. That was a big bestseller in the US. There's a sequel to that book. There's a second book. It's a better book because Noki is older. But I think these are absolute must reads if you're working with individuals that do not gain speech. And some of them can just learn to type on a standard tablet text messaging program. You can put it in airplane mode so they don't send the texts. And the reason why the tablet works is because when you type on the virtual keyboard, the print appears right next to the keyboard. You see, if I do it on this laptop, my keyboard's way down here, where you off the camera, you can't see it. And then I got to look up because the print's appearing up here. You see, you have an attention shift, and they cannot do that. It's very difficult for them to do that. And so just a regular tablet often will work best. Or if you don't have that, you can take this keyboard that I've got here is a portable keyboard. I can put it on a box and put it way up here. So that when I type on it, I can look at the button and see the letter appear. There was a person doing that like 30 years ago. That if you don't have a tablet, but the keyboard and the letter when it appears have to be close together.
They usually, when they are early age, so children between 2 and 3 or 4 years old, when they are not verbal, they try to make them to do speech therapy and improve their speech.
Well, I was nonverbal till 4. When I'm talking about the texting, I'm talking about a little older child, teaching them texting. But I was very frustrated when I couldn't communicate. And it's important to give them a way to communicate, like teach them a few signs. Or you could have a piece of cardboard with some pictures on it of things that they would want so that they have a way of communicating.
Naoki was our first speaker in an AHA talk. We launched also his book in Romanian, and he told us exactly the same thing. His freedom and his communication skills came up when just with a piece of paper where he wrote down the alphabet, the Latin alphabet, actually, not the Japanese one, and he began to communicate with his parents and with the exterior world, as he said, because he is so rich inside, and only his books and such conversations allow us to get inside his way of thinking. Coming back to my question, how important do you think is to distinguish between these 3 types of minds, and at what age?
Oh, it's going to be more like 7 or 8. You'll see it, not the real little kids most of the time. I was about 8 when my ability in drawing became really obvious. When I was 5, I can remember a painting I made when I was 5, and it was just a little kid's, paint all over the place type of thing. I remember doing it. Mm-hmm. But when they get around 8, if you give some encouragement in art, or give let's say the mathematics, you expose them to something like the Wolfram Mathematical website, expose them to some Scratch computer programming for real little kids. You see, or music. I had piano lessons. That did not work for me, but I was exposed. There'll be another child, you give them piano lessons, or just on a little keyboard, little electronic keyboard. Mm-hmm. And you give that to one child and he'd take off with it. Mm-hmm. You see, you have to expose. One bad thing that I'm seeing today is children growing up and they've never used tools. I was using tools carefully when I was 7 years old. Screwdriver, pliers, hammer. I like to make things out of cardboard. You'll see it if the child's exposed to enough different things where they'd have a chance to show the skill. I had a little flute when I was a child. I never could figure out how to play it. But another child, you give them that same little flute, and it was a children's flute. They'll figure out how to play that. I can never figure out how to play it. Mm-hmm. But there tends to be in autism, in the fully verbal people with autism, the child will be good at one thing and terrible at something else. Like my kind of mind cannot do algebra. I have never passed an algebra class to this day. And I managed to get through college because when I went to school in 1967, it was not required. I took a kind of statistics class instead. Mm-hmm. And with tutoring, I was able to get through it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. They're mixtures. The thing that's different in autism is you tend to get an extreme visual thinker, or you get an extreme mathematical thinker, or you get a word thinker who just loves all the facts in history. He'll tell you every fact about different soccer stars. That kind of stuff they find really interesting. And they're also really detail oriented. So there's some jobs they can do really well. I know in Israel, they've trained people with autism to look at satellite photos. Mm-hmm. And they're very good at finding things on satellite photos.
Mm-hmm. You are very adamant in your book about exposing the teenagers, especially the teenagers, to different kinds of subjects. So do not exclude art, you say, or music, or creativity from their program, from their curricula. Just expose them as a way for them to engage into that subject. But in the same time, you say that they react differently and they can learn differently. You give a very good example about mind calculus, about algebra. Some of people like to write it down and to use the whole rationale behind the calculus, but some of them are just going to make the calculus in their mind and give the answer. How can we, as specialists and parents, make the teachers understand that kids do think and learn in a different way? What is your experience in this?
One of the problems is, people ask me about this all the time, is the first thing that everybody has to do is realize that people think differently. And I was in my 30s when I figured out that I did not, that other people didn't think in pictures. And that was a really big shock to me, to find out that other people thought differently than I did. I'll give you an example. If you say, think about a church steeple, how does it come into your mind? I see specific ones and I'll name them off where the churches are located. And I was shocked one day. I asked a speech therapist that same question, think about a church steeple. And she just drew this. That's all she saw. I was shocked. And then I realized that you have to realize that different people think differently. And then I started looking at, the occupations, the mathematical thinkers go in things like engineering, computer science, but then the engineers need us visual thinkers. because I've started tracking down where all the equipment comes from food processing plants. And we have had a tendency to take the skilled trades out of the schools, things like mechanics, drafting, welding, electrician, these types of things. And when I was working out in the factories all the time on equipment installation, I worked with machinery designers that had 20 patents that I know were people with autism. Absolutely, they had autism. And what's happened since we took that stuff out of the schools, those people are not being replaced. So if we want to build a poultry processing plant right now, we have to import all the equipment from Holland because we're not making it anymore. And it goes back to the very bad decision that was made in the schools to remove the skilled trades. And people have a tendency to go, well, you got to go to college. Well, I've been checking that Mars rover out really closely. There's a lot of skilled trades in that. It doesn't get the credit it should be getting. It's mission critical. And it's a different kind of intelligence.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about the same reactions. So you make a parallel between different three types of minds, the autistic minds, but you also say that it's the same as the emotional. You, for example, before we started the live, you said that you get an emotional pleasure and reactions from what you do and from the discoveries that you do. Yep. As there are versus people who get this emotional reaction from socializing or from partnerships or from any connection, real connection outside themselves. And you were saying earlier that your favorite activity is like in the breaks to read science and nature. Do you think that in this era where we are talked so much about emotional intelligence and how we have to develop our emotional intelligence, is there a place for people for this type of singularity in a way, just to acknowledge that I get my pleasure from and my emotional intelligence is there only in this type of discoveries?
Well, the other problem, like I notice that people will do a little chit chat about the weather or about, they went shopping or something like that, and they're having such a great time. Now, one of the problems I have is these conversations are very quick. I have a hard time following them. But on the other hand, you're going to need some people in the world that are more interested in things. Okay, you like this technology that we're using right now, StreamYard. And I consider StreamYard a much better platform than some of the other ones that are out there. Like there's some old platforms I really hate. And somebody had to invent a better platform. Mm-hmm. That's probably not the super social person. It's probably the person, we like using our phones and our computers. But the super social people did not make computers or phones. You see, this is kind of unique. The world really does need all the different kinds of minds.
Mm-hmm. That's a pledge. Yeah, you keep doing in all the books, and that's what we really appreciate. That you are so eager to integrate all the different minds and to accept their beauty and integrate them in putting them at work in their place. We do need in every company, in every technological but also human endeavor, all the kinds of minds that we have in the world.
We need the different kinds of minds. Okay, that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal. There's probably about 6 or 7 tugboat crews that need to be getting a lot of credit for that. They did give credit to one crew. They had to coordinate to get that ship out of there, all like push or pull at the same time. I've worked enough out in heavy construction to know that took a lot of brains and smarts to do that. They were lucky they got that ship out of there as easily as they did. And there's tugboat captains and crews. I'm going to bet you that there's people with autism that have one of those boats, because I also went tugboat shopping, and I looked up the coolest, the Godzilla of tugboats. It is so cool looking. And and it's made to look cool because the person that's going to own it is going to like that. But without those tugboat crews, they could not have gotten that ship out of that mess. If they had to unload those containers, that canal would have been closed for months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
let's give credit to the tugboat crews.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just what they do takes a different kind of intelligence. Because I've worked on things when we were doing a plant remodeling and we had to get a big piece of equipment brought in with all these winches. Well, if they'd done it wrong, they could have dropped the equipment and busted it. They could have damaged the walls in the plant. It's not easy. And those crews had to coordinate.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to the way they do that children, especially children, we are talking about Romania, the Romanian way of doing therapy, and to this type of skills. You said that most.
Tell me a little bit more on the little children, the 3-year-olds. I can't emphasize enough. You have a child that's not talking. You need to start therapy immediately. Do not wait. Now, what therapy are they doing in Romania for the little 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds?
Applied behavior analysis. ABBA therapy, and whether they need it or not, they will do speech therapy, physical therapy, kinetotherapy, and sensory
integration.
Yes, integration.
Okay, good. That's what we do, the same thing. Now, the thing I always ask parents, first of all, I want to make sure with a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old that we're getting enough hours of one-to-one teaching with an effective teacher. And what's an effective teacher? More speech, more ability to take turns at a game, more skills like dressing and bathing. That would be progress for a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And the thing I have observed is some teachers have the ability. They just have the ability to work with these kids, and others don't. And so you want to make sure you're working with an effective teacher, and a really good teacher does not drive the child into sensory overload. Sensory problems are real. If you have the child, when you go to the train station, they scream, that's a sign that they got very, very severe sensory problems, and a good teacher knows how to work with that.
You said to get enough hours. How much do you think it's enough hours?
I ideally would like to get 20 hours a week, and this is for 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, 20 hours a week of one-to-one teaching. I don't really care what the name of the therapy is, because good teachers do the same things. One-to-one teaching with an effective teacher. I'm going to define it by the outcome. That means more speech, more turn-taking, and more basic skills, like dressing, eating with utensils, just your basic skills. Like I was over by the nursery school yesterday that we have, and the 1.5-year-old was not interested in the trikes, the little vehicles that children learn to steer and ride. But the 2-year-old had already learned how to steer. That's a skill. Things like that. Just share a toy truck, have a little game where you take turns. It'll make up a little game. You have to learn how to wait and take turns. That's very important. I had a lot of emphasis on that when I was like 4 and 3 years old.
You talk a lot about giving control and learn how to give control to the child during this one-to-one programs. You also say that you should do the same by enforcing life skills on teenagers.
Teenagers. The thing that's ridiculous is that the teenagers never got exposed to shopping. It's ridiculous. I'll tell you about it. I was at the airport. This was before COVID, but it was within the last 2 years. A mom and her 12-year-old daughter came up to me at the airport and introduced themselves, and we got to talking. And then I said, "Has your daughter gone shopping by herself?" "No." So I took some money out of my purse, and I gave it to the daughter. And there was a little store that sells snacks right across the hall. And I said, "Go in that store and buy something." And she went and bought a drink and brought me back the change. That was the first time she'd ever shopped by herself. That's ridiculous.
ridiculous. It's in the same terms when in families where not even neurotypical children don't have any of these life skills. You talked a little bit earlier about tools. The tools of the teenagers today are looking like this.
Well, I think we got to limit some of that, because at the little nursery school next door, there are no electronics. They were in the sandbox. Now, the 1.5-year-old wanted to just go look out the gate. This was like the 1 to 3-year-old nursery school group, and I'm able to socially distance, and it's outside. I can't go in the nursery school because of COVID, but I can look at the real little kids. And there's like a 2.5-year-old, and I asked the teacher there what the ages of the different kids, was driving a toy truck around. Another little girl was riding the little, we call it a trike. It's a 3-wheeled vehicle that little kids ride, and you can steer it. And I explained to the teacher it's important they learn to do that, because when they get older, it will help them on learning to drive. If you've ridden a bike and even ridden a trike when you're little, it teaches you how to steer. It's an important skill to learn.
You always have this perspective about teaching, learning something that now, with this perspective in mind, that it will get to an ability that you will need in your life. And we have a question exactly on this concern. Most therapy centers focus on cognitive skills and early intervention.
Yeah, and I agree with early intervention. That's super important.
You mentioned life and work skills. What would be a good balance between teaching cognitive and practical skills?
Well, you still need to teach the kid, and eventually you have to teach potty training, and teach getting dressed, bathing, brushing your teeth. You've got to learn all of those things. I had lots of emphasis on that. But we have normal kids growing up today, and I had one in my class, a college student. She had never used a ruler to measure something in her life until she got to my class. And in my livestock handling class, they have to make a scale drawing. And she'd never measured anything with a ruler. That's ridiculous. We have children growing up today, they've never used tools. That's ridiculous. And every child in my neighborhood, when I was a child, we'd get old boards and we'd, hammer them together and make stuff out of them. That's just stuff that we did. And this little nursery school that we have right where I live, there is no electronics. Well, they are going to play with other kids, and they're going to ride their little vehicles, and they're going to make little things in the sandbox, and they were having a great time. And I'm not against electronics, but we got to limit it, because if you let these little autistic kids spend 10 hours a day playing with a phone, they're not going to develop. But we've also got to teach just other skills. Dressing, I mean, that was taught to me. I was taught to lay my clothes out the night before, what I'd wear in the morning. I still do that. And when I'm traveling, I might have 4 or 5 shirts in my bag. The one I'm going to wear the next morning, I'd hang it on the chair in the hotel room. I still do that.
So a good balance between cognitive skills and life skills.
You do both.
You do both, and just to make
both. Yeah, because you need to learn to eat correctly. I just recently did a talk to China, and of course I said you got to learn how to eat with chopsticks. And let's start with things that'll be easy for them, little bites that they could pick up easily with them. You see, now I've visualized that. I actually know how to eat with chopsticks. I've been to China, and they're impressed with my chopstick skills.
Yeah.
But it's something, whatever utensil you have, you need to, they need to learn to eat correctly. No, you don't pick up mashed potatoes with your hands. And when I was a child, let's say I stirred my drink with my finger. Mother didn't scream, no. She would say, use the spoon. She'd just give the instruction, because you also have to learn these things, your basic skills, getting dressed, taking a shower, and of course potty skills. They need to learn that.
Talking about therapists, so the let's say that the therapist who's working with the child one-on-one, and the parents, how much responsibility do they have to share? How much therapy responsibility would you say is fair to place on the therapist, on the team of therapy, efficient team of therapy, versus the parents?
They both have to work on it. Therapists and parents need to work as a team. And then when I got into a normal kindergarten at age 5, mother and the teacher were working together. And if I had a tantrum and I got kicking and screaming, the teacher would call my mother, and I'd get home from school, and mother would say, you were screaming and kicking at school. You know the rule, no TV tonight. In other words, I was allowed, in the 50s, all we had was television for electronics. And I had this little children's show that I liked to watch. And if I was bad at school, that was taken away for one night. I don't believe in a complete ban on electronics, but it has to be strictly limited, because I'm seeing very bad outcomes. What I'm seeing with fully verbal people with autism, I'm seeing one group addicted to video games, sits in a room all day playing video games, and the other group goes out and starts a tech company or keeps just a good job in the neighborhood. And what a lot of parents have told me, when you get them out doing a job, even something like just working in a sandwich shop, they'll say he blossomed. And you want jobs, office supply store, that was a perfect place. Ice cream shops are good because you serve one customer at a time, so you don't have the multitasking. And we've got to do both.
You also say, so we have the professionals, the therapist, we have the family, but you also stress in a lot of parts of the book how important it is to reach to the community, and how important it is to find people who are eager to work with your child and keep him engaged or her engaged all the time. You are talking about retired teachers or people from the church.
We have
easy to do that for you in US. Is it easy for you to do that in US? Because
you see, different parts of the US and different parts of the world, you have better services. I mean, the US is a very big country. It's the size of all of Europe. And so you've got all these different states. And some have really good service and some don't. Some have lousy services. And if you have, and it's true in a lot of places. So if you're in a place where I've got a 2-year-old that's not talking, you do not want to wait. Mm-hmm. And if there are no services, I'd recommend getting some books. I think some of my books are good. And you need to get some grandmothers maybe from your church, and you start working with this kid now. Because the worst thing you can do is wait 3 years until he's 5. That's what you don't want to do. Early intervention is really important. Mm-hmm. And then you might, when they get older, you might find a retired mechanic be willing to teach them. In a lot of countries, motorbikes are very popular, and they're also safer for, like an 11-year-old can work on a motorbike. I don't want them around a car lift thing. That's too dangerous. But a little shop that fixes bikes or motorbikes, get them started helping out on that. And if they got mechanical ability to take off, we need people to fix motorbikes. Mm-hmm. That's, you see, now as I talk about these things, I see it. And I've been to countries, real low-income countries. They have little tiny shops, little tiny snack stand or some other little shop. And I'm going, ooh, I'd go approach that one. See if I get my kid to help out there and start learning some work skills. Yeah, and I want to keep them away from the dangerous stuff. But there's plenty of stuff they can work on that's not dangerous. Mm-hmm. But the thing I've learned from working with construction, been involved with big, huge factory projects. Construction is all about outcomes. I've got to get the piece of equipment installed, and I have to make it work. And I want to have the kid have a good outcome, like have a life. I've had what little video game playing I've done. I don't have any of that stuff on my computers because I would become an addict of it. I don't touch it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a really interesting career. I've worked with other people that are undiagnosed on the spectrum, doing a lot of really interesting stuff. And I get out and get a life. You know, this is the thing. Mm-hmm. There's a tendency. See, the other problem we have with autism is that when the kids get older, you have such a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you have a person that should run a tech company. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have somebody that cannot dress themselves because they, you know, some of them have an active mind inside, like Tito and Noki. And there's others where you just don't know. But they also
Mm-hmm.
often have other very serious medical problems along with it, like, you know, very severe epilepsy.
Mm-hmm. There is a question about medicine. Do you agree with taking medicine for autism, especially for autism?
Well,
so not associated diseases.
There's too much medication given out to young children. Way too much. Way too much. I talk to parents where they might be on 5 or 6 different drugs. That's disgusting. But in my book, Thinking in Pictures, there's a whole chapter on my experiences with medication, which I started taking as a young adult. I take an antidepressant, and I had extreme anxiety all through my 20s, which then resulted in a lot of health problems like uncontrollable colitis, which and when I went on the antidepressant, it stopped a lot of the the colitis problems that were just caused by stress. I have been on a low dose of an old-fashioned medicine, antidepressant named descoperim, I've been on it 40 years. And I don't know if I would have been able to achieve the things I achieved without the medicine. There's a chapter in there called A Believer in Biochemistry. Please read the chapter, because I don't want you to miss something in the translation on this being wrong. Read the chapter. If you can read it in English, I would prefer that you read it in English, because it's very important on anything to do with medication that it's accurate. But there's way too many medications given to young children. Now, if you try a medication, I'm going to just talk about some basic principles for either medications or supplements. There are some children where the special diets are helpful. Things like taking dairy out, taking wheat out. That is helpful. So let's say you try a supplement, a diet, or a medication. Try one thing at a time, so that you can then see how it works. Take notes on it. The big mistake that's made, I've seen this done with medication. So if they give them 3 drugs at once, that's a really bad thing to do, because you don't know what worked. Maybe he only needs 1. And the younger the child is, the less medication. Now, obviously, if the child has epilepsy, seizures, you have to give medication for that. You have to, because it's the only way you can control the epilepsy. But I'm talking about, you know, medication strictly for behavior. I'll talk. You know, he's on 8 drugs and he's 8 years old. That's disgusting. And then when I question the parents, I find out no thought went into this. There would be some problem. They just write another prescription. That's ridiculous. But on the other hand, I can't be against medication, because I'd probably about dead from ulcerative colitis if I hadn't gone on the medication I went on, and it stopped this horrible constant anxiety. And I since found out that my fear center is 3 times larger than normal. And I was in a constant state of fear all the time for absolutely no reason. And then when I went on this antidepressant, very low dose. Well, when you read the chapter, extremely careful about the dose. If you give too high a dose, it will have a really bad effect.
Just for the readers, I want to mention that it's chapter 6.
Yeah, that's right. Believer in Biochemistry.
Yes. Cred în biochimie, medicamente și tratamente noi. That's the Romanian translation. I want to mention that we also consulted with a specialist. So we made sure that the translation is accurate, just to make sure that the reading is what you wanted to.
Well, because especially on the medication. But the thing is, I can't be anti-drug. I've been on one single little tiny pill for 40 years, low dose, one medicine. There's way too many of the antipsychotics given out with very bad side effects. I'm not taking that. Now, the one problem I have is I have to drink a lot of water, but I can live with that side effect. But the thing I'm wondering, and I don't know, is could I have achieved the things I achieved if I had not discovered this medication? And I started taking it in my early 30s, in 1980. I've been on it ever since. I've also seen people that have been very stable on a medication for various problem with their brain. They were stable for years, and they go, oh, I don't need that anymore. And when they went off of it, it was a disaster. So if you're on a reasonable, you're an adult here, I'm talking about adults. You're an adult, let's say you're taking a med, and you're very stable and good on that med, just one med, stay on it.
It's just about balance and trying to try the one and not three of them.
You always, but you see, you don't want to start a new school at the same time that you start a medication, because you don't know what worked. You don't know whether the school changed the child or the medication did. It's always try one thing at a time so you can see how it works. Otherwise, it's impossible to know what works.
Talking about attention, there is a question from a parent, I believe. What therapy do you recommend for attention, for enhancing attention, for a child who cannot focus?
Well, one of the things that might help some children to focus, be in a quiet place. That can often help on focus. The other thing is do things to increase the interest. Okay, these kids get interested in something. I was drawing horse heads. All right, let's take a horse interest, and all right, let's read a book about horses. Let's write about horses. In other words, increase the interest factor. Increase the interest factor.
Do you think that for children with autism and Asperger's, what would be the script that we can use to make them eat? This is another question from what difficulty probably from a mother who says that she has a child with autism and Asperger's, which we know from the manual that it's on the same spectrum. How can we make them eat almost everything? And do you have any suggestion for sensor integration, good sensorial integration?
Well, the sensory integration is an evidence-based treatment. And there's a big paper that just came out on this like about 2 or 3 years ago. Some of the simple things you can try is swinging. There are some children that if you put them on a swing and do some speech therapy on a swing, that helps them to talk. Maybe balancing on an exercise ball, another simple one. I want to try to give you the things that you can do that are economical and easy to do. Swinging, balancing. Another simple one is take a board and nail it to the floor, and then you have the child walk like this along a board that's on the floor. Because activities that involve balancing can be really helpful. And there's an interesting paper called Environmental Enrichment is an Effective Treatment for Autism. And it's 3 key words you need to find it in English: autism, environmental enrichment. And what you do is stimulate 2 senses at the same time. Another thing that can help on noise sensitivity, let the child control the thing that makes the noise. Well, vacuum cleaner, hair dryer. Okay, with tools, electric drill makes noise. Then you let them turn it on and off, where they control it. That can often help. Now on the eating, I'm very concerned if a child eats only 2 things is the old vitamin deficiency diseases, really nasty things like scurvy, and that's vitamin C deficiency. If a child is a very picky eater, I recommend a multiple vitamin just for insurance, because there have been cases where the diet was so restricted that they got the old-fashioned nutritional deficiency diseases. So they take a multivitamin. One way to help get them to try new things is to get them involved in food preparation. Out in the kitchen, you can play in it, put your hands in it, handle it, and get them involved in making it. And they can eat some of it while they're making it. And that might help to desensitize. Now, there's a few things I hate. I cannot stand raw egg white. I'm going to just vomit. Okay, so there's a few things like that, like slimy. Okay, so raw egg white, I always had my eggs flipped over hard, scrambled hard. Okay, that's an easy thing to do. But when it gets to the point where the kid is eating bread and ice cream, I remember that was one particular kid, we're going to have to do something about that. But get them involved in the food preparation, where they get involved in making it, mixing it. They might be more willing to try some of the things.
That's very good advice on senses integration. Centers have come up to the conclusion in Romania, especially, that they need to have integrated this into their therapy. So in each room, they have to try to integrate this type of therapy.
One of the simple ways to integrate it would be, there are some kids, if you put them on a swing, it doesn't work on everybody. See, this is where autism is so variable. Just like the sensory issues are so variable. One will be sound sensitive, another touch sensitive. For some, deep pressure is calming. For others, they don't like it. But there are some kids that if you swing them on a swing and you do speech therapy, speech can come out. That's an easy thing to try. Or you've nailed a board to the floor. A board maybe this wide to the floor, maybe 3 meters long. And you have them walk along that board, and then you work on speech while they do that. Sometimes the balancing and the rhythm activities, this is another reason why horseback riding has been effective. You get balancing and rhythm. Horseback riding, there's some places where they don't have access to that. So I want to talk about things that everybody can have access to: nailing a board to the floor, an exercise ball, and a swing. And there are some children that when you swing them, you can start to get the speech. And there's other kids where that does not work. But it's a simple thing to try. And the kids, should like it. The other thing that's important, I want the teachers to be effective. But if a child hates going to therapy, something's wrong. I liked going to therapy. Because if the child hates it, then the teacher's probably forcing them into sensory overload, and that's bad.
You talked about your special relationship that you had with your mother. There is a question about school. Did you have a shadow or a therapist coming with you in school? And do you think that this person is important to accompany an autistic child in the classroom?
It depends upon the situation. I went to a small school in the 1950s, 12 students in a class, small, very quiet classroom, where all the children, we'd all work on our little math workbooks at the same time. And so I did not need someone to accompany me. But in a bigger classroom, I would have. If I had been put into some of these large classrooms, 30 children in a classroom, and maybe doing more than one thing at once in the classroom, I would have needed a person with me. So it depends. Now, the other thing, you always want to try to work on getting the child to be less dependent upon that person. And the mistake I often see is they don't try to wean it off as soon as they should. So let's say I've got working with the person, and then maybe the person could just try to back away a little bit and see if you can do it. Because I've seen a bad situation where a child graduated from high school, had a person with him. All of a sudden, he's in college. There's no person with him. That doesn't work. You see, you would have need to be working on getting him more independent before he graduated. And you do it gradually. A really important thing is do things gradually. Like have a gradual transition from the world of school to the world of work. I want to start at around 11 years old having work experiences, maybe delivering papers. In the US, it's no longer an option. They now have adults deliver all the papers. But if you have a situation where an 11-year-old can deliver papers, let's have them do it. Or help out in some little shop that, someplace is safe, but have them just help out in it and start learning some work skills, or volunteer to help out with a church. Now, of course, COVID has made a complete mess out of things at church because that's big groups of people. But there still could be a little shop that maybe you could help out in. But there's a tendency to overprotect. Now, when I see 16-year-olds where we've done really good with their cognitive, the kid might be in honors, but he's never gone shopping. And I've seen a situation where the parents don't want to let go when I suggest that they do some shopping. But I've gotten a number of cases, like this one at the airport. I got her to do her first shopping. It was no big deal. Now, I didn't have her go to the other end of the airport. The little shop was just across the hall. You work into it gradually.
Parents have the tendency to focus on cognitive skills more often than on life skills. And one of our specialists asks you for advice. How can I encourage, motivate parents to focus more on life skills at home and in therapy?
Well, I'm pretty blunt about it. And, when you're autistic, you tend to be blunt. And I said, if your child doesn't learn bank account shopping, he's not going to function independently. Now, one thing, I went away to a boarding school, you see, and that helped me on living independently because I was already used to living at home. But I'm just really shocked at the smart kids doing well in school. And no bank account, no shopping, not learning any of this stuff. Work skills. I've seen individuals graduate from college with advanced degrees, and they've never had a job. And then when they try to work in the workplace, they're a failure. I want to start with the children that are around chores at home, like doing dishes and things like that. And then as soon as they're around 11, I want to try to find something outside the home, like delivering newspapers or helping out in a little shop, or when the churches are open, helping serve the food or something like that. And then I want them in real jobs. As soon as they're legal for real jobs, I want them doing real jobs before they graduate from high school. Got to learn those skills. And yes, cognitive is important, but life skills are also super important.
Okay, this is the advice for parents and for specialists. See the future. Be blind. Be blunt, as you say. There is a question: what can we do about sound and visual sensitivity?
Okay, let's look at some of the different things. I'm very concerned right now about some of the LED lights. There's also a lot of new electronic light bulbs. I have one on my desk that I know flickers. Now, I don't have the problem. I can tolerate this light bulb. It's a real cheap electronic light bulb. It's not the old-fashioned kind. And there's going to be some individuals on the spectrum where this light bulb is going to be flashing like a strobe light, and it has to be changed. But I want to emphasize, not everybody on the spectrum has this problem with seeing certain types of lighting flicker. And the old fluorescent lights are a problem, but those are getting phased out. But the LEDs, you probably have 100 different kinds of LEDs, and some flicker and some don't. I know there's a special one you can buy for chicken houses that does not flicker. You can get that from the chicken house company. I don't have the problem, but I know people that do. And that's one thing that can make the environment just impossible for certain people on the spectrum. Then noise sensitivity. I talked about how if they can initiate the noise. There are some kids wearing headphones all the time, and the problem with doing that is it'll make the ear more sensitive. Now, to get the child, give them control, you can always have them with you. They can be around your neck. You can perch them up here. They can be in your backpack. And only put them on when you really need them. In other words, give them control. Okay, the train station. Okay, maybe put it on there. Or some other really noisy place that you know is super noisy. But other times try to have them off. Touch sensitivity. I have to have soft things against my skin. Now, one thing I have problems with, like I like to wear these Western shirts, and I have like the dressy version, and then I have like the old ones that I'll wear for work.
We really appreciate your branding, your style.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of I have a style, but I have a style I can wear summer and winter. Now, this is a real heavy fabric Western shirt, but I have other ones that are real thin fabric that I wear in the summer. But I have problems with the feeling like I don't wear any shorts anymore, short pants, because I can't stand the feeling of the long pants. When I have to switch from the shorts to the long pants, it's easier to wear long pants all the time. I have to have soft things against my skin. All my underwear has to be washed. Then we have the issue of masks, and this has been a big issue at the airport. Let's start 2 weeks before the flight, learning how to wear a mask, and choices. There's lots of them. Also, our school gave out these really, really soft ones. This is my favorite mask right here. I don't know what I'm going to do when it wears out, because some of the others I think are itchy and scratchy. And then some of the cloth masks, just like my underwear, I wash all underwear, but t-shirts and underwear before I wear them, because I'm allergic to some of the stuff they put in the fabric when they make it. And the same thing with the masks. Well, not the paper ones, obviously, but cloth ones you could buy. Wash it before you wear it. I just got a new one, and really nice one, and I put it on. I'm starting to itch, and I'm going, I got to wash this one before I can wear it. But you do have to wear one. But again, choices.
You also give this example in the book about wearing a mask. How can you convince a child to wear a mask? First of all, give them choices.
Yeah, they got to wear one, but they're going to have choices. And I can tell you, our airport, it's absolutely, they will kick you off the flight. They'll kick you out of the airport if you don't wear a mask. I mean, that's social distancing. They've kind of given up on that. But the thing that we've learned is that these viruses are airborne. And they're correct on enforcing mask wearing on airplanes. And you should be wearing them on trains too. I mean, I've been reading a lot of science on this. And I don't like masks either. But I don't like getting sick either. And even when we're vaccinated, you still have a slight chance of getting it. But you have choices.
Yeah.
And they're very strict at the university. I have to wear it at school. I have to. I have it in. And then when I'm walking around outside, I have it. But then when I went over to the nursery school and I got near the nursery school, I put it on, and the teacher put hers on because we were getting close to each other.
We received stronger questions now. We are going to get to those now. Can you please explain the importance of edible reinforcement in ABA for some kids, because some parents refuse to use it?
I think we have to look at what works. I would prefer not to use edible reinforcement, but maybe there's some children where you have to use it. See, this is where people are getting too rigid. I'm going to be more middle of the road. I would prefer to not be constantly feeding food. And I feel the same thing with dogs too, where, okay, I want you to sit. I have to pop a treat. I give you a treat every time I make you sit. I'm not that big a fan of that. But there are some individuals, especially some of the more severe ones, where you're going to have to use it. And then but you can use very tiny bits. You don't have to give them a whole cookie. You can give them we can give dogs like tiny, tiny bits. They found with elephants, you can give an elephant a single miniature marshmallow the size of the end of my finger to reward an elephant. So you can use very small bits. You see, this is where people are getting too rigid. You see, I want to use what works. I'd rather not be using that all the time, but if I have to use it, then it's one of the tools in the toolbox. I kind of look at it like tools in the toolbox, and it's not the first tool I want to use. My teacher used praise. That's what was used with me.
Because it worked for you.
It worked for me. I did not need edible reinforcement. We never used that with me. But there's going to be another individual, maybe more severe, where you're going to have to use it. And you can use very small amounts.
Okay, the advice is just to accept it as a parent, even though you don't agree with it, because this is what works.
You've got to use what works. And now I am concerned about weight gain. And but we can use I don't, they use like chocolate candy, just well, that you're going to get fat with that. But it's important to use what works, and then you can try to back away from it. See if you can gradually get away from it. What you don't want to do is suddenly take it away. Sudden change is bad. Surprises scare. So if you want to get rid of that reinforcement, you have to take it off slowly, and then try to find something else for reinforcement. Sometimes it's playing with a video game a little bit is used as a reinforcement.
Let's get back a little bit to the research in autism. There is a question about, in your opinion, which do you think is the closest explanation to the causes of autism? Which is the research that closes the gap more about what is the cause of autism?
Genetics. It's inherited, and it's a type of trait where it's many, many little bits of code. I've had my whole genome analyzed. It is up online. You can actually find the paper on Google Scholar. And some of my health issues popped right out. Simple genetics. I have some of the risk variants for autism. It says, actually, it came out saying I had no risk for having autism. See, the problem is the same genes or genetic codes that make the brain big, make humans have a big brain, also cause autism and schizophrenia. It's making a brain big requires many stem cells. Those are undifferentiated cells to brain cells to grow very fast. It's kind of messy. It's kind of messy, and any little thing goes wrong, you get autism. And it's embedded in the same genetics that makes brains big. Now, what I have seen, if you take two computer programmers that are probably undiagnosed and avoiding the label, their chance of having a child with more severe autism is fairly high. It's a continuous trait. You see, a little bit of the trait gives you the people who brought you this technology. Too much of the trait, and you've got somebody who's definitely not going to be inventing StreamYard. It's a true continuous trait. It isn't like now for my anxiety, there's actually a very simple genetics there. You notice I have horrible skin and horrible teeth. That genetics came right out, and I was right not to get tooth implants. My jaw could have come apart. That's something I found out from the genomic testing. I also have a bleeding disorder. I have to be very careful about how many blood thinners I take. That could save my life if I have to have major surgery. Those things were simple genetics. No, it's a continuous trait. It's not. Now you also get individuals. I'm just reading a story right now about a person that had. You can get some other really severe thing wrong, and it gets labeled autism, and it's probably not autism. I don't think it's autism when the child can't walk, and you have all kinds of other stuff wrong with them.
You talked about in the beginning of the last part of the book about the prevalence of autism. You came up in 2020 with this text about. Did you change your opinion? Do you still believe that the rising prevalence of autism is just because the DSM has changed and it's only about this criteria of people who are settling the diagnostics screening and the way they are applying more and more effectively the screening? Or do you think it is indeed a rise per capita of autism?
I think a good portion of it, I'm not going to say all of it, but a good percentage of it is increased detection. Because when I do talks, and I have a slide sometimes I show where grandfathers come up to me, and this grandfather had a good job in computers or in engineering or accounting, and he discovers that he's autistic when the kids get diagnosed. Then he realizes that he has it. And I'm finding that happening all the time. And I think one of the reasons why that grandfather had a job is in our generation, my generation, we were taught social skills in a much more structured way. And so the kids with no speech delay, the Asperger types, most of those were missed. You see, and then with the older guideline, the Asperger type, where there's no speech delay, never got diagnosed at all. Then in the early 90s, they started the Asperger. So I think that picked up some. And now it's all merged together. Also, in a lot of countries, you have to have a diagnosis to get any kind of service. That's the other thing. So I think some of it's a combination of increased detection, less emphasis on teaching kids social skills. Also, you don't learn social skills if you're glued to electronics all day. So I think there's been a little bit of research on attention deficit and too many screens. So I don't think that's helped the matters any. So it's a combination of things, because I worked with a lot of people professionally when we were building these great big factories that would definitely be diagnosed autistic today. Absolutely definitely. Or they were dyslexic. There was a whole family that I worked with in the 80s. They built feed mills, big, complex feed mills. They were all dyslexic. And for some people that are dyslexic, here's another interesting visual thing. There's some people, when they go to read, they'll see the print jiggle on the page. And there's a problem with the circuits in the brain that stabilize visual images. And there's a very simple treatment you can try for that. It's safe to try. Try printing the book on different pale colored papers, light blue paper, light tan paper, light gray paper, very pale colored papers. And they have to pick the paper that works for them. It also can help people with head injuries. Also can get a problem where they see the print jiggle, and sometimes just printing on a pale colored papers, like the back of this book right here is pale lavender. I'm talking about pale. Sometimes it works. It's not going to hurt to try that. It's just colored paper, but you use the really pale colors.
Do you know, what do you know about the broader autistic phenotype?
I don't know when I use the broader, when they included the Asperger's in the 90s, that increased the range of autism, because prior to that, you had to have speech delay to be called autistic. There had to be speech delay, onset before age 3. Then when the Asperger's came in, you could then have the socially awkward with no obvious speech delay. That broadened it right there. That broadened the phenotype right there. And then you merge it all together, and it broadened it even further.
When were you able to tell your parents, your mother, that something that you have a pain, that something aches you?
There's something what?
That you have a pain, that you have a health issue. When were you
I
able to
had a health issue, I could tell my mother. I was fully verbal, so if I had a stomach ache, I could tell her. But you have a nonverbal individual, and you have a behavior problem. And I'm not talking about a 3-year-old. I'm talking about like 10 years old, or a teenager, nonverbal, or an adult. And all of a sudden, they have a really bad behavior problem. The first thing you have to rule out is a hidden, painful medical problem, like maybe an ear infection, or a tooth infection, or a tummy ache, or stomach ache. You have to rule out a hidden, painful medical problem, because they cannot tell you about, well, I had stuff wrong with me. I had no problem with explaining them. And then you always have to give a way to communicate. That's another really important thing. Got to have a way to communicate.
You talk extensively in the book about your grandfather, the father of your mother.
Yes.
Citing also the book that your mother wrote about him and about your life. Do you think that it is indeed related to the previous question? It is indeed a genetic trait, different mind that was in your family?
I think it is. I think it is genetics. And my grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes, and he worked with another person as a partner who was autistic, who came up with the idea for a new way of making an autopilot. And grandfather wasn't interested in chit chat. When we went to visit at Thanksgiving and our holidays. He and I would sit in the other room, and he'd answer my science questions, like why is the sky blue and why is grass green? I would just ask those questions over and over again, and he would answer them. He's an MIT trained engineer. Not that social.
Mm-hmm.
You see, things are truly continuous.
Mm-hmm.
One is being more interested in things and not that social, get a label.
Mm-hmm.
It's a continuous trait.
You are born and you die with a different mind.
Well, and the thing is that, let's say a child's got music ability. If you don't expose them to music, then they're not going to be able to show they have that ability.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it would be a great advice for everyone who wants to get closer to an autistic mind, a mind that sees the world differently in any of the three ways that you talked about?
Well, I think that reading some of the books, I think my books will give them insight. There's other people that have written books. I have found the things that personally have given me the most insight. In fact, I got this other book, Different Not Less. This is 18 adults who got diagnosed later in life, all employed in different jobs, ranging from a doctor to a computer science, a tour guide at a museum. I got a really wide range of people. And I see some situations where the label holds them back on employment.
Mm-hmm.
But where getting a diagnosis later in life was helpful was like on their marriages and their relationships. One time I had a lady come up to me at the Denver airport, and she said that my book, Thinking in Pictures, saved her marriage because now she understands her engineer husband. This is where, the diagnosis can give insight, because the first step you have to realize is that he thinks differently. And he's not going to be that emotional, but if the house is burning down, he'll save you.
Mm-hmm.
He'll make sure he brings home a paycheck.
In the same time, you express your hope that you also hope for the husband to understand that she is emotional and
But that's what they have to understand. You see, the first thing you have to understand is how the minds are different. And then he can start changing his behavior, do some things that she's going to like.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't. You see, now it's explained, and this is where the diagnosis is given insight. But I'm seeing too many kids on the fully verbal end of the spectrum aren't learning shopping because they get sort of a disability mentality. That's just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And these were all the people in Different Not Less were diagnosed later in life. They all had decent jobs and they were living independently.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I am very happy with the last reply that you gave, because this is the reason why we have launched last year the AHA Books collection, and this is why the two of your books have made us understand, specialist parents and people who are working around children or persons with autism, how important it is to understand that their minds are working differently, and to do not put expectations on them, but to just try to understand and to understand.
Well, there are some things where I got to ask, well, how much the autistic person conform? I can tell you one place where you got to conform is hygiene. You cannot be a rude, filthy, dirty slob. You have to take showers. It's fine to be eccentric. I dress eccentric. It's fine to have purple hair or whatever, but you do have to. Hygiene is non-negotiable. And in the HBO movie, there's a scene where my boss slammed down the deodorant and said, "You stink. Use it." No, you've got to take showers and have clean clothes. Got to do that, and you can't be telling people they're stupid. A little bit, there's been the issue about masking. I don't think it's masking to just say good morning, please and thank you. Let's be polite. I'm not going to go out and do social bar scene. I don't do that. That would be masking if I had to do that. But just some politeness. And I had to learn on one of my very early jobs. I criticized some welding in a really rude way. And the plant manager took me aside and explained to me that you just can't use that kind of talk. And he made me apologize for calling the welding pigeon doo-doo. But he told me what he told me what to do. And that's not hard to do. I mean, I had a guy with autism come up to me and at a meeting, and he comes up to me. I'd never met him, and he says, "Who the swear word are you?" That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
No, that's just not acceptable. And this is where the 50s upbringing, I think, helped those granddads get jobs. But on the other hand, learning about autism would help one of those granddad engineers to understand keep his marriage together. You see, that's where the label's helpful, is on the relationships. But there's no excuse for someone to walk up to somebody they don't know and just call them a swear word.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's no excuse for that. Or just be complete filthy slob.
So if you were to make a list of things that we have to consider as anybody working with children with autism: hygiene, politeness, what else?
And turn taking. Yeah, and life skills. The little ones you teach turn taking, because then when they've gone to college, there's been problems with them carrying on a conversation with the professor in the classroom. So I had a little rule: I could do 2 questions per class. But there's some things where, we build up the skills, and then sometimes you have to do some stuff you really don't want to do. Like, okay, when I worked for a magazine, I loved writing feature stories about a new farm, but you also had to do show and sale results. You'd go to a sale where they sold a bunch of cattle, and you had to write it all up. A lot of lists. Yeah, you have to do some of the boring work along with the fun work. That was one of my early jobs. And as livestock editor for that magazine, I had to write up show results, big lists, take pictures of the champions. I like the picture taking, but writing up lists is not very much fun. But every job has got, like I call it, just the, boring work that you've got to do. So you can also do the fun things, writing an article about a new farm. That was fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, 1 hour and a half. Thank you very, very much. You got a lot of compliments. I will share them with you because we have to translate them. But most of them say that you are a great person, and it was a privilege to have you here. It was a great pleasure for the audience and also for myself. Thank you very much for helping us make this book accessible in Romanian. And for this wonderful conversation. I really hope we shall meet again, maybe in autumn at the ABBA conference, if you agree to participate.
Okay, well, that would be good. And we've got to, I believe in doing things that work, and I want to see individuals grow up and lead a good life. And the other thing is, some of the ones that are nonverbal, they know the difference between real work and fake work. And, there's some of we have one that works in a restaurant, and he wraps the silverware up in the napkins, does a very good job at it. Another one, he made the coffee at a service station for truck drivers, and they really appreciated his good coffee. You see, that's something where you're doing useful work that other people appreciate.
We do have a teenager in our centers and in our apartments. We do have apartments where we teach them life skills in the environment of the apartment. So, for example, in the kitchen or in the bedroom or in the living room. And one of the boys does really great coffee. I always ask for the coffee that he does because he feels appreciated.
Well, this particular person was an older person and was taught later in life how to make coffee. And everybody that went into that place to get their cars and their trucks fueled loved his coffee. You see, and he was doing something that made a contribution to the community. He made really good coffee, and he cleaned the coffee pot really well, so you didn't get stale coffee taste in it. And people really liked his coffee. And that was someone that was considered nonverbal with no skills. And it took a while to teach him how to do that. But he also got satisfaction because he could see the people were pleased with the coffee. So that's an example of finding something they can do that contributes to the community. Also gives them a sense of accomplishment of doing something other people appreciate.
Yeah, motivation, contributing to the community, and then appraisal of his work. Thank you again very, very much. I don't want to take more of your time, even though it is a pleasure to just continue talking. But I know you have also a schedule, so thank you again. I shall switch now to Romanian just for administrative, just to tell the audience where they can find the book. Sorry, this one. This is the second book. So see you again in autumn, I hope.
I will. Good to talk to you. So I'm going to leave the studio right now. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Temple.
Okay.
Și vă mulțumim foarte mult că ați fost prezenți, că ați adresat întrebări. Vom salva înregistrarea și vom face chiar o subtitrare pentru a avea acces și la întreg conținutul în limba română. Eu vreau doar la final să vă fac o invitație, aceeași pe care v-a făcut-o și Temple. Descoperiți mințile diverse citind cărți. Colecția Books este disponibilă în marile lanțuri de librării din România, dar și pe mai rapid și iată și în luna aprilie cu o reducere de 30% pe site-ul helpautism.ro. Foarte rapid o să vă arăt cum ajungeți în site-ul nostru, astfel încât să vă puteți comanda rapid cartea. Mai sunt câteva zile din această lună și puteți profita de această reducere pe care am făcut-o pentru a accesibiliza lecturile. Prin urmare, ajungeți în shop, în butonul din meniu AHA Books, ajungeți direct în colecția de 5 cărți. În măsura în care nu le-ați citit, vi le recomand pe fiecare dintre ele. Autism, cum să crești fericit un copil cu autism, este scrisă de Jessie Hewitson, un jurnalist apreciat și mama unui copil cu autism, care a scris o carte pentru părinți. Este cartea pe care și-ar fi dorit să o citească atunci când și-a crescut copilul cu autism. Toate dungile mele, delicioasă cărticică pentru copii mici, cu sau fără autism, în care vedem care este frumusețea dungilor diverse ale lui Zane. Motivul pentru care sar de Naoki Higashida, pe care l-ați și întâlnit într-un eveniment AHA Talk, povestea de la înălțimea de 13 ani a modului în care vede universul o minte aparte, și cele 2 cărți de Temple Grandin, cea mai recentă apariție, Gândesc în imagini, pe care o puteți deja comanda și va fi cu ajutorul colegilor noștri livrată rapid pentru a ajunge la voi și să o știți cât mai repede. Rămâne reducerea disponibilă până la sfârșitul acestei luni, așa că vă invităm la lectură. Eu vă mulțumesc tare și lectură plăcută și sper să ne revedem cât mai curând. Vă mulțumesc! Seară frumoasă!